This week on the podcast, Rising Tide's 2024 Peoples Blockade of the world's largest coal port.
Thousands of us are coming over 10 days to stop climate disaster, and we want an end to coal, oil and gas.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Green Left News podcast. My name's Isaac Nellist and I'm talking to you from Gadigal country in Sydney.
I'm Riley Breen, and I'm joining you from the lands of the Wadjuk Noongar here in Bulu, Perth. You might have noticed that we didn't have an episode last week, and there's a reason for that. So today we've got quite a special episode. And the reason we didn't have an episode last week was because our good friend and comrade here, Isaac, has been away at the Rising Tide blockade. So we're going to talk about that today. Start telling us about it.
Yeah, it was really great. But just before we get to that, I'll just mention that this podcast is being recorded on stolen land that was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And Green Left pledges to stand with First Nations people in campaigns for justice, land rights and sovereignty. And it's important to note as well, the Rising Tide blockade in Muloobinba or Newcastle was on Awabakal and Warramai land, and that was an important and very acknowledged part of the entire blockade was that this was taking place on stolen lands and waters. And so it was great to see, there was amazing welcomes to country and always acknowledgement of the fact that, this land was stolen. And also before we get started, please consider becoming a Green Left supporter. It's only $5 a month to get the digital subscription, and it makes a huge difference to allow us to continue producing this work. We rely entirely on supporters to continue. And also just like to say, we're obviously going to be talking a lot about the blockade and kind of reflections on it, how successful it was, where things are going next year. But also just like to say, if people are interested, Green Left did run a kind of a blog throughout the whole blockade that was every few hours updated with kind of the latest things that have happened with photos and videos. So I highly recommend, if you want to find out a little bit more detail, go and look on the Green Left website and find that. It's, the only place where you can find that kind of blow by blow kind of descriptions of what was happening each day. It was a whole long process. It was a 10-day action with parts in Newcastle, parts in Ngunnawal, Canberra. So definitely check that out, but obviously you can listen to this and get a bit of a glimpse first. I guess I'll start with some of the kind of the big kind of stats and stuff. So the blockade this year went for 10 days overall. It was about 7 days in Newcastle at the port and 3 days down outside Parliament in Canberra. It drew at least 7,000 people over the entire kind of week. Which is huge and a massive increase from last year, which was about 3,000 people. One of the things that was crazy was just the scale of the thing. When you arrived at the camp, there's tents everywhere, hundreds of tents, huge marquees set up with hundreds of chairs and massive kitchen marquees, a stage, all these kayaks that Rising Tide had bought. It was really kind of sophisticated and well-prepared operation. The kind of big headline was there was 170 people arrested on the Sunday, and then I think about 30 or so more people were arrested down in Canberra in the subsequent days. So roughly 200 or so arrested over the entire action, and that's after some massive kind of state repression that we've reported on previous episodes.
Yeah, and just on that, I wasn't able to keep up entirely with all the blow-by-blows happening, but I was of the understanding that the city of Sydney itself, sorry, not the city of Sydney, I was of the understanding that the city of Newcastle itself actually, went out and supported the action and tried to kind of counteract. And then there was also a victory, and I think we might have reported on this, but in case we didn't, there was a there was an appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court itself actually overturned this attempt to block waterway access.
Yeah, I guess I'll do a quick kind of run through of all the things that happened, because particularly in that last week leading into the blockade, there was so many kind of flips and changes in like how the government were trying to shut down the protest and how the protesters and Rising Tide themselves were responding. So initially, this is what we did report on, was the Form 1, which is the form that protesters in New South Wales have to submit to, hold a protest, make sure the police don't kind of arrest you for blocking a road or something like that. Was rejected by New South Wales Police, which means they had to go to the Supreme Court, and they did successfully overturn that Form 1 proposal, which pretty much meant that, like, if protesters went out onto the water, into the shipping channel, they could be arrested. So that was quite a bit of a setback, but it didn't deter Rising Tide. They said it's still legal to protest, still legal to be on the water and on the beach. We're going to continue. And yes, as you said, the city of Newcastle granted the Rising Tide major event status, which pretty much gave them permission to camp on the public park that's near the beach, permission to have all the marquees and things set up that I mentioned before, the stage, and without that permission, it would have been quite difficult for the blockade to have the same effect. There was discussions about campsites 40-minute drive away and things like that. So it was, quite lucky that, like, in that last kind of week or so, that City of Newcastle gave permission, and that's, the newly elected council in Newcastle is the current mayor who granted permission said that he went to Rising Tide last year, found it to be a really great environment, really family friendly, and I think it actually brings a lot of kind of tourist income to Newcastle, with people. Thousands of people flooding in from around the country, and that the new mayor was also a former Labor member that's left because he doesn't like the way Labor's gone, and it was actually supported by a kind of team of community independents in the Newcastle council elections. So that was interesting to see how that kind of really helped the blockade. Then the other thing that happened was the New South Wales government imposing the exclusion zone around the harbour, which was banning anyone, including locals going to the beach or tourists who are going sightseeing, from going into the water around Newcastle Harbour. So that included all the nearby beaches, included kayaking in the harbour, included people going fishing and stuff like that. So that was a huge kind of overreach from the government.
Supreme Court ruled that wasn't fair, didn't it?
Yeah, so on the last minute, I think on the Thursday, Rising Tide went to Supreme Court and challenged that ruling and overthrew it. Basically, the ruling kind of relied on the fact that exclusion zone law is really in place to facilitate events, not to block events. So that's kind of the legal explanation. But I think also the huge public pressure from the fact that we should have the right to protest also was an important factor. So there's video of people celebrating when they hear the news that the exclusion zone was overturned, and I think it was such a win to be able to actually still go out on the water and continue with all of that. And so the blockade went ahead pretty much as planned. The only kind of setback from all of that was that without the Form 1, we couldn't go out into the shipping lane and actually stop the coal ships. So there were police there the whole time, all these like police boats, jet skis, things like that, basically blocking us from going into the shipping lane, and they had these like yellow buoys marking the kind of safe zone that was closer to the water where you're allowed to kayak. And that was, the protest pretty much complied with that for the first 2 days of the on-water flotilla. But it was on the Sunday, the final day that we're supposed to be out on the water. Everyone went at around 10 o'clock Sunday morning, and hundreds of people went out into the shipping lane, and led to about 170 people getting arrested for being out there. But successfully made a coal ship do a U-turn and turn the other
Yeah, I
way.
saw the footage. It was fantastic.
So that was very satisfying. You know, after seeing a few coal ships going by every few hours that weekend, it was great to actually be able to, turn one around and delay it for a few hours as well.
So obviously, as socialists, when we look at mass movements like this, we want them to be democratic. We want them to be a movement that everybody that's participating in the action or the movement gets to have a say in how it's run and the direction it goes in. So I'm curious, did you have like mass meetings where that decision was made, or is there kind of a group of organizers that makes that decision? Like, how is this? I guess from the perspective of someone who has been learning how to organize, much smaller scale, but still, aspiringly mass action events such as Zim pickets in especially the last year against, Palestine stuff. I'm curious to know how that kind of organizational stuff is done.
It was, anyone who wanted to and knew the risks of putting themselves into that position went, and it was just kind of coordinated that people could go together so it would be a bit safer. There was a really great kind of mass grassroots kind of decision-making system, which they call the spokes councils. So there was roughly about 2 a day most of the time, one in the morning and one in the kind of afternoon, evening, where participants, so the thousands of people who were there, were encouraged to organize themselves into affinity groups. And some of these were based around location. So there was like a big group from Adelaide who kind of came together as an affinity group. A few of us were part of the Socialist Alliance affinity group. There was affinity group for under 18s. There was affinity groups for, a group of friends so it was formed around a variety of things. And then they would elect a spokes who went to the spokes council. So, and then they were kind of a mass meeting where they were facilitated by, Rising Tide organizers, but they were basically a decision-making body where, thousands of people were being represented in these meetings. And how it kind of worked was the spokes sat in the kind of front row of the big kind of semicircle gathering. And then, everyone else was welcome to attend and would sit like in the second, third, fourth rows of however many people wanted to show up. It was fine. And the idea was like consensus decision-making. So it was kind of like trying to come to decisions that everyone would agree with by, kind of negotiating. And it was most people were quite agreeable, and it would be interesting to see if there was a major kind of disagreement, how it would have played out, but there wasn't really anything like that. So that was an interesting way. I think, there's things you could say about whether, everyone should have a vote in a mass meeting. But it's definitely kind of as an interesting experiment in mass grassroots decision making. And I think, because
when you've got 7,000 people, it's ideally you'd want everybody to be able to have the maximum say, but logistically you've got to make a decision in a limited period of time, and you can't just spend 10 hours waiting for every single person to speak and go back and forth. So I'm very interested in the kind of logistical challenges of making sure that it's as democratic as possible, while at the same time making sure that you can have decisive decision making. I guess there's in kind of more socialist or Marxist jargon, we'd call that kind of the centralism versus democracy, and kind of on what end do you have that kind of democratic centralism?
Yeah. I would say like the spokes councils, I'd say weren't perfect, but I think they were, at least a really good attempt at trying to meet those conflicting demands of trying to get things done, but also give everyone a say. And it did bring a lot of people in. It felt quite participatory. I think there's one important thing to keep in mind though when discussing this side of it is like this is a coordinated, planned out media media kind of stunt. Not to say that in a negative way, but the whole idea of it is to get all this attention on the fact that thousands of people want real action on climate change, want to stop new coal and gas projects. I think if this is like a long running indefinite blockade, or if it was a kind of just a campaign kind of meeting system, it might be less effective. But because it was like there was a clear goal, we're doing this for 3 days, we're blockading out on the water, it was really important to be able to get announcements across really quickly to the whole group, and to give information that was like necessary about, you know, a variety of things. And so what would happen is the meeting would, you know, go, any affinity group could present an idea or suggestion or whatever to the whole meeting. They could make announcements, etc. And then the idea is that the spokesperson would take that back, and they have to tell the rest of their group that they're representing all the decisions that were made, all of the kind of discussions that were had. There's lots of finger waving and clicking and stuff like that to show if you're in favor or against decisions. But yeah, that was quite interesting. I was also just say there was some people who, you know, expressed a bit of frustration that we weren't blocking the coal ships the whole time, and I will admit, like, it didn't feel great to see coal ship go past like every few hours while you're out there on the water paddling. It's kind of you know, the whole idea is of blockading the port, but I think that's a fair enough feeling to have, but I also think that wasn't the main point of the protest. I think it's more about you know, building this mass movement, getting all this media attention. The Rising Tide described it as winning the story war, and I think they very successfully did that. There was, I think, over 5,000 different articles published about the blockade, including, you know, international news, Al Jazeera, I think it was BBC, a few others, and
Yeah.
so that was successful.
Yeah, I've noticed there's a tendency. I mean, again, I'll just go back to because it's my main point of reference, I guess, is the Zim pickets that I've been part of. Within the organizing of that, I noticed there was a tendency to view it in very binary terms. Either it's a symbolic action or it's an action that actively blockades. And there were people that said, well, unless we're active, you know, unless we're stopping all work all the time, then it's a complete failure. Or unless, you know, there was less of the other end of the binary to it, really. But, you know, there was this kind of tendency to view it as, you know, not both symbolic and practical, but just, you know, just a direct action that has a direct result. And I think that's kind of not the right way of looking at it. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, which is, you know, yes, we want to have the direct today impact, but that's also a part of the symbolism. And we, you know, the symbolism is kind of actually the primary goal, and the direct action is kind of a very important part of it. But at the end of the day, you know, if we block one coal ship, two coal ships, three coal ships, or one Zim ship, or for 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever, you know, ultimately for our long-term goals, whether that's, you know, ending war in Palestine or, you know, taking action on climate change, those are, you know, they're such tiny drops either way that the symbolism is actually what's going to matter. It's building that movement and making people feel like they're a part of, you know, giving people the real experience of organizing so that they can then take that experience to the next action, and actually start to grow that. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how that played out there and whether you agree.
Yeah, I think it's good to put it in the context of what this is coming out of and what it's part of in terms of the climate movement. I mean, the climate movement was at its peak in 2019 when there was the school strikes happening. That was around the time of the Black Summer bushfires. There was huge protests in most major cities, and, you know, all these other stuff going on as well. Hit by COVID, a lot of those people, you know, those school students moved on, went to onto work or to university, other things, and just that 2-year slump of not really being able to get out and protest had a massive impact. So the climate movement was quite a weak point in particular, particularly before the previous blockade last year. And I think that the way we should look at these blockades is almost like a spark that's reigniting the climate movement across the whole country. And I think we've been in a period of, you know, trying new things. There's been lots of kind of direct action with small groups of people blockading things. There's been attempts at school strikes that, you know, have gotten decent numbers but haven't hit the kind of explosive levels of 2019. And this was just so impressive to see 7,000 people all camping out for multiple days and willing to, you know, be out in the sun, be out on the water the whole time. And yeah, I also just mentioned as well, you said like getting people to participate and join in. It's like there was over 1,000 people who volunteered for different volunteer shifts. So they were not just attending and being, you know, a kind of passive participant or even just being there for the kayaking and stuff. These were people who were attending and then also cooking, washing, cleaning toilets, acting as security, acting as marshals, police liaisons, legal advice. So these are all people who are getting active experience in organising and are taking those back to their own cities, their own campaigns that they're a part of. So I think that will have a kind of flow-on effect in the future. And yeah, like you said, I think, yeah, no matter how many coal ships you block a week-long, if you block the coal port, the Newcastle coal port for a week, that would be amazing, that would be massive, but it wouldn't shut down the industry. Like, the coal industry is so profitable that they can weather, you know, a week-long blockade, even a month-long blockade probably. But what we really need is that systemic change that will actually, you know, stop fossil fuels, shift to, you know, publicly owned renewables, and all of the other changes that we need in society. And I think we can't expect, even if 10 times the number of people got arrested, we would still not be really much closer to our goal. Whereas the fact that, you know, if a small chunk can be arrested and it's massive, like it is the biggest civil disobedience for climate in Australia's history. So I don't think we should like minimize that. But at the same time, the fact that like, yeah, 200 people or so got arrested, but 7,000 people or maybe more participated in the action, I think is the really important side of it. And yeah, it's amazing that, you know, the people who got arrested as well is worth looking at. It's like 13-year-old kids, 80-year-old grandparents, you know, a coal miner, a former military veteran. It's like such a broad spectrum of society. Obviously, a bunch of, you know, radicals and
and that's what you want to see in a mass movement. Is every, you know, you don't want it to just be you know, the same old lefty activist faces that you see at every protest. You want it to be people from every possible background that have come to conclusions in their own way and are there for possibly completely different reasons, but are all on the same page that we need to do something about this, because that's the only way we can build a mass movement.
Here we are at Rising Tide's blockade of the world's largest coal port in Muloobinba, Newcastle. We've just launched the flotilla at 11 o'clock and we're going to be out here on the water for the next few days, saying we don't want any more coal being taken out of the ground. We're going to stop all new coal and gas mines and tax the super profits that the coal companies get. So
I feel so privileged to be here with incredibly courageous, bold climate defenders and climate warriors. We know that the only way that this government will move to tackle the climate crisis and to end new coal and gas is through a mass people's movement.
We're here with Rising Tide to fight for climate justice. It is actually kind of like unacceptable that the Albanese government is so committed to supporting the fossil fuel industry. We're also here, you know, to actually, you know, show that there is mass support for climate justice and that we need to put the pressure on the Albanese government, because the Albanese government are not doing enough.
It's super important we get out and demonstrate people power, saying no to coal. We're in a climate emergency, we need to act now.
I'm all the way from WA here at Rising Tide in solidarity with the fight against coal, because of course over in WA we are fighting gas, right? So we've got a government now, well, now we have the choice between nuclear or gas, which they're spruiking as clean transitional fuel. It's not. It's as toxic as coal, if not worse. So we're here to, as I said, stand in solidarity, say no coal but no gas as well.
We really need no more gas and coal, like the kids say, there is no planet B. But the other reason is the whole Min's government, let's try to stop this protest, let's take action under the protest laws, and then let's create an exclusion zone, which goes down in the Supreme Court. Two good reasons to actually be here representing.
Well, it's vital that people get out here. I mean, the similarities between what's happening in Palestine, the extraction and the pillage off the Palestinian coast, and you've got coals being exported from here to the occupier Israel to be used to power its economy. And we've got to be crazy not to be down here at the beach right now. So good on the people who've come out with the rising tide from Palestine all the way over here to Awakabal country. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
In case people don't know, the world's largest coal port is right here in Australia, in Newcastle, and we've got thousands and thousands of climate activists coming here together for a mass, non-violent, direct action.
We hate coal and we want to live in a happy world when we're older, and we want our kids to live in a safe place.
There's a boat coming, a ship full of coal, wanting to pick up coal, take it back out. And there's been 20 arrests, so the police are just grabbing people out of their kayaks and putting them in these really big black boats. The morale is really awesome. These are climate heroes who are getting arrested, and this mass civil disobedience, this mass action, this mass movement that we're building, you know, we're going to be looking back at Rising Tide 2024, which re-sparked this mass upsurge of people to save the planet. So we don't want coal, we want renewables. It's really clear, and the billionaire class, the coal barons, we're coming for them, and we've got people power, and we're going to utilise it. Woo!
Our channel! Our channel! Our channel!
What the organisers kind of said on the Monday, there was a bit of a wrap-up session, a bit of a kind of debrief and plans for the future kind of sessions. And what Rising Tide organisers were talking about was really prioritising the hubs in the different cities. So, you know, there's a Sydney hub, Melbourne hub. I'm sure there's, I don't know if there's a Perth hub, but there might be forming.
Talks about it. We'll see.
Yeah. So, you know, there's an emphasis on trying to grow this into a more of a national movement and not just based around just Newcastle. And there's talks around, you know, what actions could we do leading into the federal elections, things like that. And I think there's also discussion around, like, I think they said, you know, make 10% of members of Rising Tide as an organisation trainers. So they're, you know, passing on the skills, training up new activists and new organisers to get involved. And there was a bit of an emphasis of that at the actual blockade, with a lot of like workshops and, you know, non-violent resistance training, whatever it's called, and I guess like that.
Just sorry, I'm interrupting, but I was thinking about, you know, this was billed as you know, a so-called protestival, I think the term used was. So maybe as part of that, like, you know, there's this workshop and so on, we can talk about that, but also just you know, what were the kind of, you know, fun draw cards, you know, what were the really, like, you know, interesting parts of it that kind of, you know, because it's obviously not just, you can't just have 10 days of very serious organising all the time. There's got to be some fun bits in between, and that's kind of what it sounded like as well.
It's so much fun just being out on the, like, some of my highlights in particular were just the parts where we were out on the water, everyone locking on with each other's kayaks, you know, chanting various, you know, slogans, and it was a really good atmosphere. And there's some great, I'll put some video like mixed into this whole podcast, but also there's plenty of stuff online on Green Left and on the Rising Tide social media. So that was really fun, and just like being out on the water with, you know, friends and comrades was great. But there was also heaps of activity. There was loads of music. Like there was a stage there that was pretty much had music on every single night. You know, artists like Dobby, who's a amazing artist based out of Gadigal country, Sydney.
I'm indigenous, I left it at that. She's like, you're surely not an adult, I don't think it would be much, right? What's your eyes here on my skin, on my appearance? Cause I'm not your typical black fella. I can see it, you don't see it, I should follow
Peter Garrett, Midnight Oil, former Labor politician, John Butler from John Butler Trio, a bunch of like local Newcastle-based bands, Worlds Collide, which is a really fun kind of mix of different cultural backgrounds that all come together in this really awesome band that I really recommend people checking out. So there was all this cool music and stuff going on the whole time, which was great. There was, yoga sessions every morning if you're into that. There was, like a kind of chill out hub where you could do like painting and drawing and stuff. There was pretty much, any kind of activity that you would do. There was a group that were kind of doing it, which was really cool. I mean, we at Green Left, we had discussion groups, a couple of discussion groups each day talking about, topics like eco-socialism, why we need eco-socialism, or like imperialism and ecocide, linking kind of like Palestine and the climate crisis and things like housing, how do we get more public housing, various kind of discussion groups on that, which went down really well. And there was also kind of seminars, like there was a seminar held by the Greens where various Greens MPs and stuff spoke. Tom Ballard, the comedian, he had a live podcast recording, which maybe we should try and do next year. And yeah, heaps of stuff like that. And I think it's hard to kind of describe the feeling and the atmosphere when there's like all these people around and you're all kind of, believe, we need change around this and we're all working together. And, we've all come from wherever we've come from and are camping out and participating in this big action. Yeah, it is very inspiring, I think. And I think I really recommend anyone, particularly if you're in like Sydney or Newcastle, like where it's easy to get to, just come down, even if it's for the weekend next time it happens. I mean, we don't know all the plans for next year yet, but there'll definitely be some kind of blockade. It's really inspiring and a lot of fun, as you said.
Yeah. Was there anything? I think I cut off talking about the workshops before.
There was just a lot of kind of educational stuff, workshops, and I mean, even like participating in the spokes council meetings was an interesting kind of way of picking up different organizational strategies and stuff. I think there was, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the arrests, like what actually happened with the people who got arrested. So the plan on Sunday was like, let's go out into the shipping lane just after a coal ship passes, because it's technically legal to be in the shipping lane as long as there's no ship coming, basically. So like as soon as the ship passes, we'll go in, everyone can paddle around, and then the people who don't want to get arrested can go back into the safe zone before the next ship comes. But literally as soon as we started paddling out, police started picking people up. So I was there kind of up the front, but like I wasn't planning on getting arrested. But it was like, police jet skis whipping into you, police coming by, like grabbing people out of the kayaks. But so it was quite intense, but then quite a lot of people got through into the shipping channel, and it took police a couple of hours to kind of round everyone up. And as I said, about 170 people got picked up. It was really funny because people were getting picked up. The police were grabbing people on a jet ski, taking them back to shore, and then taking their oars off them, and then just letting them float.
Yeah, I saw one video where someone said, someone arrest them for theft.
Yeah, well, so they were doing that, and people pointed out, rightfully so, like, it's very dangerous to leave people in a kayak with no oar in the harbour. So eventually they stopped doing that after some pressure from the police liaison people. But then what would happen is, people would get dragged back to shore and then just paddle straight back out again, which was quite fun to see. And then eventually probably get arrested if they stayed out. But so that was like kind of like part of the whole experience, was seeing these people getting pulled back in and going back out, and it was quite funny. And then after a few hours, I was out on the water paddling, and I looked at the beach, and the police were just taking everyone's oars. They had like hundreds of oars that they were taking. And and they literally took them all back, put them in a police van somewhere, and drove them off. So they literally stole these oars, which was kind of crazy. And there's quite a few videos of that. And yeah, someone said, yeah, call the police. It's like, oh wait, they're the ones taking them. So that was just obviously an attempt to stop people getting out on the water. And they did end up returning the oars the next day, obviously after some pressure from organisers and stuff. And but it was good we got the oars back. But the people who got arrested were kind of put into these big black boats, taken away to be processed, and pretty much all of them got their details, the police got their details and then released them. And most have court dates, I think, in January. So we won't know for sure what they're going to be charged with until January, or like what fines they're going to get, things like that. The maximum fine with the new New South Wales anti-protest laws is $22,000. So it's a huge fine. But
I saw the City of Sydney was actually helping out with some of those costs.
Yeah. So yeah, on the next day after the blockade, on the Monday, the City of Sydney, thanks to a bit of a push from some of the people who attended, pretty much put a motion supporting the right to protest and donating $22,000 to legal costs or fines, etc. But yeah, I don't think anyone's going to get that maximum $22,000 fine. I mean, if everyone who got arrested gets that fine, that would be pretty crazy. And the other option is you can get 2 years jail is the other maximum penalty, which would also be pretty over the top. And I don't think anyone will get those maximum penalties, but there's always a chance.
Well, you think if the prosecutors are, even a little bit politically smart, they wouldn't even try, because if they do try, then there's going to be a campaign that pushes back against it, and that's more media for us. So
yeah.
You would hope. I mean, for both of our sakes, I guess, because we don't want to have to fight that fight. But if we do have to fight that fight, then you can turn that into a media circus quite easily.
Yeah, definitely. And last year, I don't think anyone got those massive fines. I think a few people got smaller fines, but most people didn't get a fine at all. So that's quite a positive sign. That you never know exactly what the legal system's going to do. So we can't really rely on that, but hopefully it'll be good news. And yeah, I think there's a lot of goodwill of people who participated, whether they got arrested or not, who would happily donate to kind of help support people, pay fines and things like that.
So I was wondering when it comes to the arrests, I mean, obviously, so personally, I'm no stranger to being arrested at protests, and I think in general, Green Left and Socialist Alliance and so on, we have absolutely no opposition to being arrested when it's useful or necessary. I have encountered, certain sections of the climate movement that kind of tend to view arrests at actions as less of a means to an end and more the end itself. And they'll tend to say, you're not a real activist until you've been arrested. I tend to disagree with that. It's a useful tool sometimes, or it's a necessary thing to do sometimes, but it's certainly not, a goal to achieve in and of itself. Do you think there was a lot of that attitude kind of floating around, or do you think it was more kind of pragmatic, kind of we'll put ourselves in this position because this is what's useful at the time?
I think with such a big group, it's a bit mixed. Like there would definitely be some people who think the arrests are the really valuable part, and there'll be some people who are fully only doing it for the pragmatic reasons, and a lot of people probably have a little bit of a mix of both. There was definitely a sense when you were there. Like, I didn't go to the blockade planning to get arrested, but when I was out on the water, it really felt like, you should, or like I felt like I was tempted to put myself in that position. I just happened to be in the kayak with someone who, had other responsibilities that would have been very much thrown off by that. So it was probably good to hold me back, But there was this really strong feeling of like, we're all in this together. The more people who get arrested, the better. Whether it is better or not is, that's up for debate, I guess. But I think, we don't want everyone who's involved in the climate movement getting arrested, because that will just be a massive hurdle for the climate movement, I think. But I I think the people who did, it was a powerful kind of statement to say, you know we're going to get arrested. We're going to do it anyway because it's for a good cause. And it did get last year the arrests were the big media story, and I think it was important to have that element for the big media story. It's also just like, fuck, we want to blockade a coal ship for a few days, and the police and the New South Wales government won't even give that tiny concession. I think if we didn't challenge it, it would have been a bit of a setback.
You've always got to push the line at least a little bit. And if that means taking a few arrests, then, then I think that's worth it for sure. And, even having the symbolic victory of having turned that one coal ship around, I think if you hadn't have even turned a single ship around, then it probably would have, a lot of people probably would have walked away feeling quite defeated or deflated. So, I think in that case, it's definitely worth it, because when it comes to these kinds of campaigns, people's morale is actually one of the key resources you've got, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it would have, even though personally I don't think it would have been a failure if no one got arrested, etc., etc. I think that, as you say, a lot of people would have felt a bit deflated or a bit kind of, what's the point, blah, blah, blah. And we're still at a point of trying to kind of educate people about that we need, this sustained mass protests. We can't, just blockade stuff for a few days and win. We need actually a bigger campaign than that. But I think the Rising Tide organisers also, that's part of their plan, is to build a mass movement through, these high profile actions that draw people in as well, as opposed to the more kind of secretive kind of strategy of only 5 people know about this action, and we go there under the cover of night and lock onto something, and that's its own kind of strategy tactic that has its own strengths and weaknesses. But I think Rising Tide's approach is a bit different to that, and I think it's really good to have the mass approach. At the
end of the day, we're not going to achieve anything without a mass movement, and actions like lock-ons or whatever media stunts, that's been the primary approach here. And, that kind of media can be a step towards building a mass movement. But unless you've got that as the strategic end goal in mind, then, you're really just kind of doing short-term things.
Yeah, it has to be part of a strategy. All of these things are like a tactic that you can do. But if it's part of a broader strategy, then you can have a variety of tactics. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be such a wide array of groups and people and organizations that kind of do a whole range of things, but eventually come together, that will win the demands that we desperately need, and particularly around climate, and then eventually, all the other demands that we need around, and all the other campaigns will all have to come together, and that's long-term kind of where we kind of should be looking. But I think at this stage, particularly with, as I said before, the climate movement is a bit of a lower ebb than it has been. This is kind of a spark that can give it a bit more momentum and push it to a higher level.
It sounds like by that measure, it's been very successful.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who came to this, it might have been their first protest or their first, at least their first kind of direct action, disruptive action type thing. And it would have been a huge learning curve for so many people. Including myself, as you get so much out of these kind of actions that it's not just the immediate impact. It's sometimes hard to see what the longer term ramifications will be. But I think Rising Tide have big plans for next year, and hopefully they can draw even more people in and have even more of an impact as well next year. There's some talk about getting a fleet with boats and ships to support the blockade, so that would be pretty amazing. But I kind of want to finish up soon, but I'll just mention it's very impressive, the whole infrastructure organizing that has gone into this. So I think it's a massive hats off to Rising Tide for that, in terms of, they spent $60,000 on portaloos. and they were definitely needed. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I suppose that kind of just basic thing is something you don't really think about in terms of mass movement. You know, you think about the cool, sexy stuff like getting arrested and going out in the water and all that kind of stuff. You don't think about the fact that people need to shit.
Yeah. So, like, thank God they had put so much planning into the practical side of, you know, running a camp for, well, I think it was ended up being about 7 days in Newcastle. Like, huge effort. And I think you could really feel it when you were there. I think someone put up that it was the kind of kitchen volunteers cooked 22,000 meals as well. So that's like just so huge. And obviously we love to see huge rallies in the city where you have 100,000 people marching in Sydney or something. But, you know, those people are just going home and going back to their houses and their comfortable showers and beds and stuff. Where even though it's only a smaller number here, there's 7,000 people, but they're sleeping in tents, using portaloos. You know, it's a bit more of an ask. Commitment. Yeah. And as I said, like people from all over the country, Patrina, like your comrade who we spoke to a few months ago on the podcast, who's part of Disrupt Burrup Hub, came over, and it was really great to kind of hang out with her on the water and be part of it with her. And, you know, actually a huge group from Adelaide came up. There was hundreds of people from Adelaide, which was really cool. And obviously a lot of people from you know, Sydney, Newcastle, decent amount from Melbourne, Brisbane. It was even met people from Darwin and Cairns and far away places. So that was really cool. Was there any other questions that you had before we kind of start to wrap up?
No, I think we just about covered everything. I mean, we could talk about this for quite a while, and maybe there'll be updates later down the line when we hear about the outcome of the arrests. So I think we're all good for now.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, I'll just plug again that live blog that Green Left were running the whole week, because you know, if you really want a summary of everything that happened, there was lots of actions that I didn't actually mention. Like there was a Pride march that took place as part of it. There was a school strike rally with all the young students who were attended. There was a Palestine flotilla on the beach, which we're involved in initiating. And just to mention as well, so many kafirs and Palestine flags throughout the whole camp, which was really great to see.
Yeah, no, it's good that people can kind of see the connection between these. You know, on the surface, they're disparate issues, but on the whole, they're really not. You know, the war in Palestine is environmentally catastrophic. Imperialism comes out of climate catastrophe. You know, they're all interlinked.
And not to mention, there was a coal ship from Newcastle that went to Israel fairly recently, a few weeks back. So there was that direct kind of link as well. And seemed to be pretty broad, like, you know, pro-Palestine sentiments, pretty broad understanding that, you know, war and, you know, climate destruction are, you know, one and the same. And also, which was, you know, one thing that some have criticized the blockade for is the fact that, you know, workers get impacted, like the workers who work at the coal port and things like that.
Well, I saw people chanting on one of the kayaks, actually, the whole MUA here to stay, and making, you know, deliberately making the point, you know, the people on those ships are not our enemies. I thought that was really good.
That's what we were going to mention. It was inspiring to see that, like, understanding of worker solidarity, and I think, you know, there's a decent amount of workers who are, you know, do want a just transition, moving over to renewables, new training and jobs, green jobs for workers in fossil fuel industries and communities. So that was an important aspect. There was a forum that was held, a Just Transitions Forum, with, you know, unionists. I think the secretary or the president of the AMWU spoke. So those links are there. I think there's obviously, you know, you can strengthen them a lot more. And that's what, you know, the organizers are working on. But I think there's a lot of positive steps in that direction that's worth singing out to. And I think that'll be where we really win, is when, you know, the port workers stop work to support the blockade, and
exactly,
that would be like the big moment. Definitely check out the live blog. And, you know, if you look around, this blockade got loads of media coverage. That was the, you know, intention. But no other publications were giving that kind of rundown of everything that was happening. And I think you can only get that from an activist news publication like Green Left, where we're literally on the ground, participating in the whole event. And
yeah, I doubt any ABC journalists were there taking part.
Yeah, they maybe have come down for a few hours, take a few shots and then leave or whatever. But I think it's important to show, you know, that we can be part of it and also covering it. And I think it would be a massive help if people did appreciate that to, you know, support Green Left. We don't have the huge budget that all the other media companies have, and we just rely on the supporters. So I think it's, great if people can support. And, you know, $5 a month or $10 a month if you want the hard copy paper. And, you know, we can do an even better job next time. There's a lot of things, there's a lot going on the whole weekend. So I was a bit running around trying to get photos and coverage of everything. But I think we can do it better with a more sophisticated team and things next year. And your support would go a long way to helping facilitate that as well.
Thank you for your great summary, Isaac.
Yeah, no worries. And there'll be more coverage in the Green Left website as well, people should check out. But yeah, that's about all we've got time for this week. As I said, become a Green Left supporter. Also check out the Green Left calendar for events coming up. It's nearly, you know, Christmas time, New Year, so some things die down a little bit, but I know particularly here in Sydney, Palestine rallies are continuing every Sunday throughout the whole summer break period. I think it's the same in Melbourne as well, and there's loads of other events happening, so head to the Green Left calendar at greenleft.org.au/events. Also, a big thank you to Sean Valenzuela, who did the music for this podcast. You can find his work by searching at Little Archer Beats. And yeah, a massive thanks to all the listeners. Met a few down at the blockade, so it was great to see you and say hello. And we'll see you next week for the next episode. Thanks for listening.
Bye, comrades.